Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Executive Scrutiny Board meeting, Tuesday the 14th of March. Do I have any apologies, please? No apologies, okay. Any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Excuse me. Number 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of February. You've got those attached. Is there anything that's not on the agenda that people wish to raise with regard to those? If not, moving on to the forward plan, item 5 on the agenda. You've got those attached. Lucy, is this about item 5?
No, it's about item 4.
Oh, why am I not surprised? Lucy?
Because
okay.
we also have the minutes. We also have the minutes of the 1st of March. And I wanted to particularly... Yes, I'm going to say thank you very much for getting the minutes for the 1st of March here, because most of them were done in a private session. But yet we have some minutes here which are public, and I really appreciate that. We still don't have the minutes public, and a set of minutes for even us to see from the issue that related to this earlier. But I'm really pleased to see these here.
Thank you. Everybody else is pleased to see them here again, I guess. Thank you for that. Forward plan, item 5. Any comments before I move on from that? Gone.
Hello, good evening Chair, good evening Councillors. Catherine Williams, Head of Regeneration, and also have with me Sarah Banks from the Our City, Our River team. So I'll provide a brief introduction to the report. Members will be aware OCOR is an ongoing programme to bring greater flood resilience to our city. It's been ongoing for around 10 years now with the Environment Agency, and it's a hugely important scheme for Derby, both in terms of our resilience, but also in terms of the partnership work with Environment Agency and the regeneration opportunities that it brings as well. This specific report relates to the Derby Riverside phase of Our City, Our River, and we last came to Cabinet in February 2020 to secure approval to progress this scheme. We've delivered all of the work programme tasks that we outlined at that point and reached a significant milestone last week with the submission of a planning application for Derby Riverside. So the purpose of the report to this Cabinet meeting is to seek further approvals to continue delivery of that project. And that involves further design, procurement of a contractor, and subject to final costings, etc., progression through to construction. There's 2 other technical approvals that we're also requesting. One is a slight change to the red line boundary, scoping land acquisition required should we need to move to a CPO process to secure the land. And the second is to delegate approval to accept a further £1 million of funding from the Environment Agency. So in terms of the report, the first part summarises the work that we've done so far, including the current work happening at Mill Fleam. And the report also describes work that we've done on the flood modelling tool that we've updated to include those defences that have already been complete in package 1. And then we also talk about land assembly. There's a couple of points to note on that. Previous versions of the scheme proposed demolition of Exeter House in order to deliver Derby Riverside. That's no longer the case. We've changed the alignment, so Exeter House will be retained. And we've also removed one of the offices on Phoenix Street from the CPO boundary. We've been engaging with owners and occupiers in Derby Riverside because the project will require removal of 3 office blocks to make way for a green space and conveyance corridor. So we talk about what the work that we've been doing in that regard on the report. And then in terms of next steps, we describe the design process, the procurement approach, etc., to continue delivery. So those are the key points, Chair. clearly, as always, happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. A couple of points I've got. So there is local concern about the recently erected floodgates on the temporary bridge by the mill, and people living in Haslam's Lane, Folly Road and the mill area are concerned that if they were closed and there was flooding further up by the rugby club, they would in essence be trapped in that area. Obviously, we're trying to reassure people that we assumed that people would be evacuated before that actually happened. But I don't know if there's any reassurance that we ought to be giving to local people with regard to those floodgates, because local councils were a bit surprised when they were put onto the temporary bridge. So I don't know if there's any comments that you can make on that. And then the second point is with regard to, I know that's stretching what I can expect from you, I think, and probably Nigel as well, but with regard to the permanent replacement bridge, we just wondered if there's any chance of OCAR providing some pump priming money for the permanent replacement bridge. I've written to the King following his announcement that billions of pounds from North Sea from North Sea wind farms should go to local projects. This is because they're owned by Crown Estates. And I've pointed out to the King that Crown Estates owns this bridge, and I would hope that he could influence that some of that money would be directed to this World Heritage Zone. So 2 questions about the floodgates on the actual bridge and whether OCAR could help provide any pump priming money. I don't want to come back on that, Catherine, then I'll take Cabinet members.
I just wanted to come in on your point, Councillor Repton, because I just think it's, although it's a very important point, I don't think it's relevant to the OCOR paper today. And I do think if you want to make these continued efforts, which I totally support, I don't think it's correct for the officers to be asked to comment on that today.
With all due respect, I think I and other councillors here will raise what we think is relevant. So could you respond to that?
I'll respond briefly. Yeah, I'll respond briefly, Chair, and then I think Nigel would also like to contribute. Obviously, your questions relate to Darley Abbey as opposed to Derby Riverside. I know in terms of discussions with the Environment Agency, I'm aware those are ongoing to respond to some of those questions regarding the floodgates. I think, in all honesty, I'll need to take that away, Chair, and discuss that with colleagues and the Environment Agency and respond separately, given the content of this report.
Yeah, thanks. If you can come back to me on that, I'd be grateful. Any more comments at all from anybody? Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, really, it's more of a compliment, really, thing. I remember years ago, there used to be a grotty old wood yard on the side of that Derwent Bridge. And then I was working away at the time. When I came back, they built 2 filthy great office blocks, and what I think is a useful place where we should have an embankment coming straight out of the river. Now I see from this they're going to be demolished, and we're going to get some sort of green space on the side of the river, which I think is to be highly commended, Chair. Yeah.
Mike, I think, yeah, that's a very good point. Any more comments on that before we move on? Yeah. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair. Just to welcome the additional funding from the government and OCOR, obviously, I appreciate that there will be more to come in need of that going forward, and let's hope that that's something that we can carry on with the Derby City Council.
Okay, right, if there's nothing more on that, we'll move on to item 9, redevelopment of the Drury Lane car park. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members will be aware that we're facing unprecedented need for additional affordable housing in the city at the moment. Members are well aware of the scale and pace that we're trying to work to in terms of developing and acquiring new affordable housing. This particular scheme, Chair, consists or proposes 17 homes are built on the Drury Lane car park, and I'll draw members' attention to paragraph 4.3 of the report. Paragraph 4.3 makes the point, its second sentence says, revenue in that period has averaged just under £1 per space per month. I need to correct that, Chair. It should actually say it has averaged just under £1 per space per week. So it's not quite as poorly used as the report as drafted makes out. But I think the point is nevertheless the same, Chair, that this car park has very little use. It has around about 10 sales per week, Chair. That's the order of the use of the car park. And colleagues in parking services have certainly approved the redevelopment of the site for affordable housing. That's all I wanted to say, Chair. There is a confidential item at the back of the agenda today which outlines the costs in detail, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. Any comments? I'll take Lucy first of all, then Alison. Lucy.
Thank you. And the following paragraph that you've just highlighted, 4.4, talks about season ticket holders. And I suspect that a number of the users there may well have been season ticket holders because there's quite a lot of terraced housing nearby, and the surety of having somewhere to park may well meant that people have picked those up. And I wondered whether there'd actually been any check done as to whether there are season ticket holders who live in those immediate streets who have been utilising it, and whether any attempt has been made to contact them in terms of consultation. So it doesn't become a bad news story when it happens.
I think there's only some very small numbers, but I'm sure Ian will go into those. Ian?
I don't know that specific detail, Chair. Happy to come back to yourself and Councillor Kerr. What I do know is that the team have been out at various times during the day and in the evening, and it is very seldom used, the car park. But it's a good point, Chair, and I'll come back to you with that.
Thank you, Ian. Alison.
Thank you. In the view of the Cabinet's decision recent decision, in fact, to introduce fixed-term tenancies for four-bedroomed houses in the city, I see, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, that there are no proposals for four-bedroom tenancies once again on this site. Could you explain why that is, and where, sorry, not tenancies, houses, where you are proposing to build four-bedroomed houses? Thank you.
Ian?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We have a programme for the next 2-3 years, Chair, which consists of about 160, 170 homes in total. The number of four-bedroomed properties within that wider programme is about 10%. This particular site, because of its tightly constrained nature, wasn't suitable for four-bed houses, or if we were to squeeze four-bed houses on there, the overall numbers of houses would fall significantly, Chair. So we've taken the decision not to include them on this site, but to make sure that other sites that we're bringing forward do have four-bed houses on, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. If there's no more comments on that, I thank Ian for that. Moving on to item 10, the infrastructure programme, board capital programme. Who's taking us through that?
That's me, Chair.
Thank you.
This is the annual report, which you've seen many times and expect at this time of year, setting out our highways and transport capital programme. Although this year it is slightly different, and that's because it's in line with our council budget and our MTFP, which included a review of our capital programme last year. So that review was very necessary because of the increasing pressure on our revenue budget, both in terms of the ongoing maintenance costs of capital infrastructure investment, but also the higher revenue costs of capital borrowing. As well as 2 years of slippage on the programme, which we recognise, the costs of inflation and energy, which we all know about here, construction and material shortages and labour shortages, and generally industry skill shortages. So those were the reasons why we felt it necessary to review. The report sets out a work programme for the following year and an indicative asset management programme as required by the Department for Transport, and the budget has been reprofiled as set out in 1.2 of your report. So the recommendations seek approval for the 3 programmes and delegation to change as required across the financial year. I guess just on reflection, our review certainly concluded that the capital programme has been changing over the years, and that certainly we need to reflect and review. It's expanded considerably as set out in 4.3. And it also has a bit of an inbuilt inbuilt expectation of annual delivery, which I appreciate all of you will know is not the case. Some of these schemes are very complex and take a while to come to fruition. But I think that we're putting pressure on the programme and eroding our resilience and also in expectation and your confidence in our capital programme. So in response, we want to set out some key improvements which start next financial year, and they're set out in 4.5. So we want to establish a year one consolidation and reset and create a 5-year cycle for this programme rather than and move away from that annualised approach. We will consolidate in that first year, looking at the scheme backlogs that we have in the pipeline. Also to develop an entry and prioritisation criteria for how we plan and profile across the 5 years. We're having a look at our governance and ensuring that we refresh our outcomes and objective and strengthening the programme resilience we have. So again, giving you confidence, giving us confidence that we're managing, and to accelerate investment in asset management. So we know asset management has always been a key theme of this programme, but actually we want to super strengthen that because we recognise the importance. So in that year one, we will be begging your patience as we trial and test our approach. It's clear that it will change. Again, as we consolidate that backlog, any new schemes will be assessed and added across that 5-year scheme with a strong weighting to good asset management. We will, of course, work with the emerging locality arrangements and ensure that you are kept updated and informed and involved in all parts of the scheme. And our highways maintenance scheme, which makes up the bulk of the funding, will continue to be designed and delivered in line, again, with the asset management prioritisation approach that you expect and has already been agreed. I accept that there are still risks. There's still a lot of uncertainty about energy, about material and labour costs and availability. And there is a reduction of capital in this in next year. So we know that even the slip funding that we have from previous schemes does not buy as much as it used to, and that there are certainly implications for the ongoing revenue maintenance. Now, that could be a benefit because it defers that maintenance, or it could be negative because it adds operational costs. And we're going to have to consider and weigh those things in the balance. You know, we are exposed on those ongoing revenue costs because of the macroeconomics of the economy, but also our own budget position. And we'll need to make sensitive and thoughtful decisions, which will require mature dialogue with you as key stakeholders. There are some other key points that just to highlight in the report. Capital investment in LEDs, I think that's something you would expect us to see and prioritise. Our vehicle programme continues to try and switch to clean fuels, mindful that there is the availability of light fuel vehicles is still challenging, so we will still extend the life of the vehicles that we have. I will be very clear, the flood defence programme does not have any new funding in the following year. This is because this asset area is particularly complex and the schemes do take more time to deliver, and we really want to get on top of the programme and the backlog that we have here and really build up the asset and the asset information and to really inform that 5-year programme as we go forward. Highways maintenance as well, of course, have reviewed their eligible capital expenditure and really want to maximise the use of capital grants to reduce that revenue pressure. So just to summarise, we think that these changes are necessary because of our budget position. We think we'll keep reviewing and we'll look to maximise that use of capital funding to reduce our demand on revenue pressures, of course we will. And we also recognise how important these schemes and the local schemes are to you as ward councillors and the residents that you represent. And we actually believe that these proposals that we initiate over the coming year and this move to a 5-year programme will improve the transparency of the programme, help to keep our expectations and engagement with yourselves and key stakeholders, and give you greater confidence in the planning, delivery and management of our assets.
Thank you very much, Verna. Any comments or observations? Mike and then Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the difficulties they're having. I wonder if there's any opportunities in a 5-year programme where we know costs of materials and stuff are somewhat volatile, to buy things that you might need or you're going to need later on in the programme early. I realise there's storage costs and things for that, but But it's something I used to do in my old business.
Thanks, Mike. Werner?
Yeah, I think we'll certainly, we always look at those and we try and think, again, I think because we've got a 5-year programme, it allows us to have those sorts of conversations that we haven't done before. I note your point about storage though. We don't have a lot of space. It's something we've struggled with in the past. You can't we haven't got anywhere to store lots of Yorkstone or paving slabs or that sort of thing. So it is a concern. But I do think this programme allows us the opportunity to consider that approach, yes.
Thank you, Werner. Lucy?
Thank you. I've got 3 points. Firstly, in terms of the Section 106, I can't find a recent update of the Section 106 information, but last time I looked at it, there were several items which were coming close to the need to be spent by. And I'm just concerned that by saying we're not going to programme Section 106 items in, we might miss some of the deadlines by which we need to be spending. And I'd just like a comment on how that's going to be managed. Secondly, the 5-year programme is fine, but I don't want it to be a hard 5 years. I think it needs to be a rolling 5 years on an ongoing basis. And it doesn't seem to be, my reading of the report didn't emphasise, it emphasises the 5 years and the 5 years, not a 5 years with an annual review and rolling forward. Because if we don't have a 5 years with an annual review rolling forward, we're going to hit a cliff edge and we're going to have had staff who have finished projects and not knowing what to do. So I'd just like that clear reassurance that that is the intention. And the third point is in regarding the terms of reference and the way they're drafted at the moment, they itemise not just the cabinet positions, but also the cabinet members in post. And that may well be out of date very soon, both in terms of the roles, the specific roles that they are being given, but also the people in them. And if we're not wanting to review it frequently, I think we need to label those as being the cabinet member with responsibility for and not a title.
Thank you, Lucy. Werner?
Absolutely, on the last point, yes, we will change that. And again, confidence in yes, I mean, the point of doing it across the 5 years is that we can make those annual assessments, and we'll have that greater confidence and be able to understand our resourcing and how we deploy those better. And it may be that we need to target in one area over another as we make that as we go forward. I think we're being quite open and honest about this. There will be a period of trial and testing. So we will always be up for changing where we know we can improve things. So I take your point on both of those, and I think I would like to give you the assurance that we'll certainly be looking at that.
Thank you, Werner. And the
I'll let Nigel answer that one.
Okay, so on the 106, you're right, there are a few that are identified as within 18 months or even shorter time scale for timing out. They are, though, committed in the programme already, even though the projects haven't been added, the spending has been committed, usually as part of supporting the delivery of Transforming Cities schemes, where they're playing a role of providing the local contribution. So there's no danger of them dropping off the conveyor belt as such. And then looking forward at the ones that come out over the next 3 years, some of those are tied to very specific projects, usually around providing pedestrian facilities. The question mark there is that again, comes back to the point Werner made, across the programme as a whole, we are capitally rich, and you can treat 106 as capital in the sense that it buys us facilities, but we're revenue very poor. And so, we're trying to work out now all the implications, positive and negative, about where that investment can be made and where it's sustainable. And actually, certainly in the area of turning on energy costs start from day one. So we've got to be really mindful about being able to do something, but it just loads to already pressurised budgets. There's a whole orientation to be done over this sort of 5-year investment period, and how that period rolls forward and how the market changes.
Thank you, Nigel. Okay, if Lucy?
Chair, I'm hearing an appreciation that there needs to be some sort of rolling 5-year plan, but I don't believe it's there within the report going to Cabinet. And I think it's something that is worthwhile highlighting, that it is something that would be important. So I have a recommendation just on that point to say to ask Cabinet to arrange for the 5-year cycle to be a rolling programme with annual updates, not a fixed 5-year period followed by another 5-year programme, so that there is greater ease to balance workloads and respond to changing priorities. If it's already going to happen, they will accept it. If it's not already going to happen, it'll mean they think about it.
No, I think it's just a point of clarification in the report. I think we are looking at sort of 5-year investment periods that roll over with a review period within that. So it's very similar to what you see in things like National Rail, National Highways, other infrastructure commissions, and we're trying to echo some of that process. So it's a point of clarification in the text. We'll sort that out.
Yeah.
Nicola.
Thank you, Chair. You touched on earlier that obviously some of the slippage due to COVID and other things has there's been indications that a lot of the costings have gone up. You know, specifically from my own ward in highways, our meetings have shown that some things have almost doubled or tripled in costs from when they were first put out to tender. And if those slippages have come through, those pressures have come through. Has there been any projects that have been cancelled or won't be going ahead as part of this realignment, or is it just a case of reallocating all the projects that have already been in state, if you like, over the next 5 years?
Nigel?
It's a good question. I think what we're going to have to look at is where the schemes are still affordable. Where the schemes that were proposed 2-3 years ago are still actually valid, and you know, are they value for money is what we're going to have to look at. You're absolutely right. I mean, baseline construction industry inflation has been running at between 15% and 17% for a prolonged period, with volatilities on individual materials as well. So steel, some concrete products, etc., some timber products. So a lot of the work that we've got to do very quickly is actually go through, and we've done some work on this already, as you probably guessed, but is actually reassessing the programme and seeing what's affordable, you know, and just trying to construct a sensible, deliverable programme that, you know, we will bring back to the localities and the ward councillors to discuss what is a real priority here, because we can't afford everything that's buried in the programme. And the point about delivery is that the programme was fit for purpose 22 years ago under the old LTP structure. I mean, and it's a hangover that it's an annual programme that pretends there's a start of year and an end of year. The world doesn't work like that. Construction doesn't work like that. The report sets out the vulnerabilities to weather, etc. So I think it's just trying to get a reality grip on that and reduce the risk to the council from unsupported borrowing and all of those issues, but make it more deliverable.
Okay. Just come back in, Nicola, and then Lucy wants to come back in again.
I think historically there's been a lot of drawn up plans that, you know, obviously that takes officer time, consultation times, all of those things go ahead, and then we don't get the end result. And I think if we can, this will help to get to the point where we're not going, oh, these are the great plans we're going to do, and they never materialise, because I think that from a resident's perspective is I'll believe it when I see it, you know, and we need to come away from that. It needs to be, yeah, this is going in and this is when it's happening, because, you know, we have got into that sort of bad view from residents, I think.
Lucy?
I had a recommendation that was seconded. Shall I read it again? To ask Cabinet to arrange for the 5-year cycle to be a rolling programme with annual updates, not a fixed 5-year period followed by another 5-year programme, so that there is greater ease to balance workloads and respond to changing priorities.
Thank you very much. You're seconding it? Okay, right. Okay. Okay, shall we go to the vote then? Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. Okay.
That was
Right.
4 in favour, Chair, 3 against.
Okay. Right, okay. If there's nothing more on that, on to item 11. And that is the... Sorry?
I put my hand up earlier.
Oh, sorry, Heidi, go on.
Appendix 2, page 18, table 11. It's under crematorium, it says to be confirmed. I think it's looking at £3 million. Could you clarify what that's about? It's under vehicles, plant and equipment work programme.
I'll have to take that back with our colleagues who work on the crematorium. I think it's in there as a placeholder at the because it needs to go in the capital programme, doesn't it? Yeah.
The reason I was asking was whether it's to do with the whole crematorium business case, or is it something?
No, it's just around some essential maintenance that probably will be required for the crematorium that's been put on the capital programme. So it's not in relation to the business case that has yet to make its way through the process.
Can I just sort of clarify on the business case for the crematorium? Is that still somewhere in the process, or is it being accepted or rejected?
It's still in the process. I think it was considered, but I think in light of the current financial pressures, it was not the right time to be investing in that on this particular capital programme.
Sorry, Chair. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that we've got a climate impact assessment, which I'm really pleased we've got, and we've got these coming through. But there is absolutely no way that we can spend nearly £20 million and have it almost all beautifully green, because the impact of the resourcing and the materials and the disposal and the energy that's going into doing that physical work is not going to be green all the way through. And I think it reflects that we may need some more training or some more awareness raising or something in the way that the climate impact assessments are being done. I would expect something to be half green and half red, not entirely green.
About that, Verna?
Yeah, we've worked through the climate impact assessment using the tool as best we can. Obviously, this is a really big programme with lots of complexity, so probably those headlines don't really reflect some of the debate and discussion we've had to get to this point. And you know, there are a lot of positives in what the capital programme does overall, but it's perhaps I take your point that it's perhaps a little simplistic for such a complex programme, and it doesn't perhaps expose some of those, you know, those nitty-gritty issues which we're all struggling with. I mean, I think there's there are so many models and ways of assessment that touch on the capital programme that we need to think through. I think we'll get better at it, Lucy. Forgive me, but I do accept that, you know, that this was an overview.
Right, thank you very much. Moving on to item 11, adult social care fees and charges. Kirsty.
Yes, good evening, everybody. This report will be going to Cabinet tomorrow, and for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you might notice that the numbering under section 4 has gone a little bit off-grid, shall we say. So there'll be some frantic getting the numbering back in line. This is just obviously a editing issue. But that aside, this report comes annually to Cabinet because councils have got a duty under the Care Act to make sure that local social care providers have, I suppose, clarity about what the council will be paying for the people that we need them to care for. And we've got a duty to make sure that that's considered sustainable. So by that we mean something that actually allows those care providers to continue. And we do this every year, but this year has been slightly different in that as part of the government's reform agenda for adult social care, all councils were required to take part in a national exercise which was called the Fair Cost of Care.
And what that was about was trying to understand in more detail the costs that care providers were experiencing in their local area. So we've got our usual process that we follow, and then there was this additional process, which I'll come back to in a second. But essentially, what Cabinet will be asked tomorrow is to note the process that we undertake to establish what we think care fees need to be for next year. And that concludes in the recommendations, which you can see are about an increase of 7.1% for what we call standard residential care and nursing care per week, to approve 6.5% for domiciliary care services, so those are care services delivered to people's homes rather than in an institutionalised setting like a care home. And then the council also provides some services which are primarily administrative, and in line with the rate that's been applied for inflation across a wide set of council services, we're proposing that 3% is added to the fees that we charge, with the exception of shared lives. And the thing for really to note around shared lives is that the fee that we actually pay goes to carers, so it makes more sense that we increase that in line with the percentage that we think is more appropriate for directly provided care services. And in this case, it's home care, because all of the shared lives arrangements are provided in somebody's home. And then the final few recommendations is we do have, as I'm sure this committee will be aware, people who organise their care directly themselves, taking a direct payment. And we normally suggest that where those individuals approach us, because our relationship is with them rather than a care provider, that we will inflate their fees or the allowance we give them for their fees of up to 6.5%. And the reason that that is up to is because not every arrangement is directly with a provider who might be incurring cost pressures. Some of it's around family members, for example, but it gives us that flexibility to go up to 6.5%. And then the final recommendation about fees, there's another couple which I'll just touch on, is where we have people who are in more specialist care provision, where we don't have our standard contracts and we negotiate those based on their individual needs, because we can't apply a similar methodology for those because they're all very different. We'll be asking Cabinet, as we do every year, to delegate that authority to the Director of People Services in conjunction with the Cabinet member, and we look at those on an individual basis at a later stage in the year. And then the other two recommendations, which aren't specifically about fees but are related, is we want to apply the new rates at the rate of the national rise in benefits, which we're expecting to be the 10th of April. And also a bit of a note about what we plan to do with the fair cost of care exercise that I referenced. I could talk to that if you want, although it's in the report under 4.2. The reason that I'm not majoring on that is because, as you'll be aware, the charging reforms have now been delayed.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Alison.
Thank you very much for this. Obviously, in this climate, it's difficult to put up charges, so I appreciate that. On the other hand, we know it is necessary. So I'm not sure if this is really for you or for Alison, Kirsty, because I raised this point last year about what is classed as a standard rate of inflation in the council, and of course, following that, we had a real spike in inflation. I see in the news today that there's sort of proud claims that inflation has now dropped to 6%, but this sort of running standard inflation rate seems to be applied across the council is only 3%. Now, as I say, I think all of these fee increases have an impact on people that are vulnerable in our city. On the other hand, you know, when we're constantly cutting back services and when we're restricting who can access care, what is it about this 3% as a norm for inflation? I mean, that is currently half the only recently reduced inflation rate nationally. So if I could just get a comment on that, thanks.
Who's best answer this? Alison?
I mean, I
Kirsty.
let me do, if you could definitely pick on the 3%, that would be helpful. I think the reason that we haven't applied the 3% to the care costs is because we do a deep dive, and actually some of their costs, which are primarily about workforce, so the rise in the living wage, but also particularly for care homes who've got heating and lighting bills. I mean, 3%, it would just be, it's not defensible. So that's why when we put in the numbers, actually the rate is beyond the rate of the council's referring to, which Alison can cover, and it is, you know, naturally higher than what the council might be applying for a wide range of services, because it's service specific. You know, it has to be about the context of providing care. But Alison, I don't know whether you can elaborate on the 3%.
Yeah, so in terms of our budget planning, we will apply inflation at the most appropriate rate through the budget planning process. So you'll see from our reports last year was big, you know, significant pressures in the budget time for utilities, for example, as Kirsty explains with the fair cost of care. So we don't inflate all budgets just at the standard rate of inflation. We do take it appropriate to what we see that's happening in the wider economic context.
Thank you, Alison. Alison?
If I may, Alison, I'm not, sorry to press you on this, but I mean, and Kirsty, thank you for that answer. That entirely makes sense, seems very reasonable. And obviously, you know, you might expect variation in any increases to the charges the council does charge. But I just think that I'm not really clear what you're saying, Alison, because the national inflation rate is double what, I mean, even today when it was heralded as being on the way down. But it's, you know, that's an optimistic forecast. So I just can't see where this 3% is coming from as a general point. Thank you.
So, well, I think from a lay councillor point of view, we see inflation, it's gone down from 10% to 7% at most. Why are we only doing 3%?
We haven't just inflated our budgets at 3% across the board. I mean, are you referring just specifically to social care or to the budget planning in general?
Well, in her report, we had the same discussion last year, as I explained at the beginning. There was an assumption that the norm for the council increase, given the rates of inflation, is 3%. That's what we said. So therefore, but 3% is well below what inflation is actually running at. So if it is the norm, why is it only 3%?
We plan for what we think is the most appropriate rate of inflation, depending on what the type of expenditure is. I get that 3% is very low compared to what's happening in the economy. We haven't applied 3% to the whole of the cost envelope of the budget. Some of them have had 23%, depending on the type of expenditure. And in terms of the adult social care, you know, funding has been put aside over and above general flat inflation to enable us to be able to put additional monies into those social care budgets, recognising that inflation is running at a much higher rate than the 3%.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to expand on Councillor Martin's point, actually, because quite clearly at paragraph 4.13, it mentions the 3% increase. But when you look at that service, it includes staff, it includes energy costs. So how can you apply 3% to that?
We haven't increased the social care budget by 3%. We've put more than 3% into the social care budgets. If you have a look at the budget report, you'll see that there's extra pressures in there. Things like recognising national living wage increases, for example, where that has increased up to about 10%. I think you'll find that there's probably around 1.7 million that was put in the adult social care budget. So that isn't the 3% is not the is not the total amount of money that's reflected in the care budgets. We will look at additional pressures, and you'll see that in the budget report, quite substantial additional pressures around inflation that have been put into the budget on top of the general base inflation calculation.
Ah, right. I think it's becoming clearer now, perhaps, that this is on top of another increase to allow for inflation. Okay, okay. I think the penny's dropped, or the pound's dropped. Well, the pound's going up, but this one's probably dropped. Right, Lucy, you want to come back in?
First time for this one, thank you, Chair. I just wondering whether we've actually got all the recommendations we need, because I was interested to read about something here, which I have a resident who's no longer my resident, who has been supported through, I've lost it now, I think it's deputising service or something or other. Yes, deputyship and appointmentship service. And and this is listed there at the end with, again, a 3% increase. But in the recommendations, we don't seem to have had a recommendation to increase some of these charges by 3%. And I wondered if there was a recommendation actually missing from the paper.
Shall I deal with
Kirsty,
that?
yes, please.
Some of it is about the language, and I can see how it's confusing. The reason there are two figures in the report, and I'll definitely get to the appointeeship, is because we agree a fee that we would pay an external person, an external provider, for the provision of care. And those are the ones that are being proposed to be increased beyond the 3%, because the provision of care is subject to a range of inflationary pressures, predominantly around workforce. But then we also charge, as a council, for administration of care activity, appointeeship being one of them, whereby we're looking after somebody's affairs on their behalf, their finances and what have you. And it's all of the ones that are administered by the council that are being proposed to have 3%, because that's the kind of minimum amount that the council's applying for inflation. But the reason there's a different amount for the others is because they're going to external parties. And I get the point, it feels that we've got a differential, but in this case it actually benefits people, because this is about what the council is charging individuals will only go up by 3%. And actually, if we were to increase it more, the charge to individuals would actually, for example, Councillor Kerr's constituent with an appointeeship would be higher. So I think it's the language of fees and charges. And the report is about fees and charges, but you need to think of fees as being what we pay, not what a customer pays, and the charge is what we charge.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think from my perspective, where I've been confused is that in recommendation 2.3, the charging rate for council provided services of 3%, with the exception of shared icons. I'm immediately thinking of council provided services as being the direct care services which we're providing, as opposed to the administrative services which would be included as a part of the deputyship.
Yeah, I recognise that.
I think my question I've answered myself.
It's all, and to be honest, it's a bit of both, because in historical times we did used to provide lots of services. The reason that Shared Lives is different is because we organise the Shared Lives care, but it's provided by a third party. Right. So just to add confusion.
Thank you very much. Right, if there's no more questions on item 11, we'll move on to item 12, which is a consultation outcome on the viability of Ashgate Nursery School. I think it's you, Pauline, isn't it, on this?
Yeah, that's right. I'm here in place of Gurmail Nizar on this occasion. Yeah. Just log in. Okay, thank you, Chair. So, yeah, so this report is to outline the consultation outcome on the viability of Ashgate Nursery School. There is a background there from 1.1 onwards around the purpose, but the key presentation here is the outcome of the initial consultation. Following the Council Cabinet approval on the 7th of December, that consultation took place over a 7-week period, and the consultation document and response form were made widely available. 1.5 outlines the total of 225 responses that were received during the consultation period, and some of those summaries are also attached from the governing body of Ashgate Nursery School and Central Nursery School, which is a single federated governing body, and from the Unison, both objecting to the proposal. I'd also like to make it clear that a very comprehensive equalities impact assessment has been carried out, I understand, over 3 quite lengthy sessions to give real due weight to the discussion that needed to be had. But in view of the ongoing low occupancy levels and now irreversible financial difficulties at Ashgate Nursery School, the proposal is for Council Cabinet to consider approval to progress to the next stage of the consultation process. That would include the publication of a required statutory notice and a further 4-week representation period. Subject to approval, the statutory notice would be published in May 2023, and the outcome of the statutory consultation would then be reported to Council Cabinet in July 2023, when a final decision would be taken on the proposal. So the recommendation is, recommendations are to approve the publication of a statutory notice on the proposal to close Ashgate Nursery School from January 2024. That would be the closure point. To approve a further 4-week statutory consultation on a proposal to close Ashgate Nursery School from January 2024. And to note that subject to the approval of 2.1 and 2.2, the outcome of the statutory consultation will be reported to Council Cabinet in July 23 for a final decision to be made on whether or not to close Ashgate Nursery School. And the key point here really is in 3.2, which is that the irreversible financial difficulties at Ashgate Nursery School mean that the proposal is for Council Cabinet to consider approval to progress to the next stage of the consultation process, and that although a huge percentage of over 91% of the consultation responses are not supportive of moving towards closure, that actually what hasn't come through are viable alternatives and financial resolution to make this school financially secure and viable for the future. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Pauline. Before I pick, you've got a difficult job, I understand, and you have my sympathy, Pauline, to present this, because the consultation exercise is quite damning. 91% objecting, 225 responses. You've got comments like Ashgate makes an important contribution and provides support to families in the community, 33. Worry about negative effects on children and families will be affected, some of whom are vulnerable, 27. Loss of highly skilled, professional, knowledgeable, caring and dedicated staff, 33. And so it goes on. Central Nursery will become oversubscribed, 36. And right throughout this, I can't see anything which should point this authority to closing this. So I will be making a recommendation, but before I do that, I want to take, and certainly most important, the Ward Councillor, John Whitby, and others. John.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid this is very much a sort of a knowing the price of everything and the value of nothing sort of scenario. As you mentioned, Chair, overwhelming response against this closure, not surprisingly, because there is overwhelming support for this fabulous nursery. We wouldn't be in this position, that's the fundamental thing, we wouldn't be here without the change to the way that SEND funding is allocated, or as was allocated in 2019, and there's absolutely no willingness to accept the reality that that is the problem. There's nothing else. Even the Council's own EIA suggested or supports the notion that the schools, all the different areas of the school's business are viable or returning a profit, with the exception of the SEND funding. The school, as like all schools, will have to do as a 3-year recovery window. Now, although the council are suggesting that this is all down to falling numbers and COVID, it clearly isn't, but COVID has had an impact on its recovery. So this 3-year recovery window, about half of that has been affected by COVID, understandably. The problem, the extra issue is that all these children have to go to Central. Now, Central will not accommodate all of these children unless, of course, the council stops admissions to Ashgate and runs the numbers down and then moves those children across. But if they do this fairly, then Central will not accommodate all the children. The fundamental problem here is this is not addressing the actual problem here. So you close Ashgate and Central becomes full, and children with higher needs and higher resources will still be admitted to Central because of the admissions policy. So Central's then £450,000 deficit will increase, and no doubt in a short period of time that'll be closed as well because it can't possibly pay the bills. And then the problem would just go elsewhere. They'll go to Whitecross, they'll go to wherever, Lord Street, and soon we'll have a domino effect and we'll have no nursery schools left. We have so little early years provision left. I mean, it's unthinkable that we're, as you say, Chair, the consultation is very good. It is so damning of this concept. And also, probably the final thing I want to say is the statutory guidance on closing schools. It does say decision makers should adopt a presumption against the closure of maintained nursery schools. The case for closure should be strong, and the proposal should demonstrate that. And the second point is replacement provision is more accessible and more convenient for local parents. I mean, that definitely can't be met. So in terms of a strong case to close it, I mean, I can't really think of a single case to close it, but certainly not a strong one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. A lot of these points we will be making tomorrow night at Cabinet, I am sure, because I understand the difficult position that Pauline is potentially in. But Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Pauline, I know you're here representing the council. I do not believe, and you won't comment on this is actually what you think is a good idea. If you look at the context of education in Derby at the moment, we have dropped even further in terms of educational attainment from where we were pre-COVID, so in these latest examination results. We both know that early years education is absolutely vital to setting a child up to later educational attainment. We know that we have areas like this area where children and families need more support than they might do in other areas, though I think all children deserve the kind of quality education and nursery care that places like Central and Ashgate do offer. And I think that is a point worth dwelling on for a moment, because whilst there are other childcare providers in the area, and there are some other very good council nurseries such as Whitecross and others we know, the difference in quality level between what the council offers in through its nurseries and what the private providers provide, and they do a sterling job, don't get me wrong, you know, they work very, very hard. The quality is incomparable. And I mean, the council does a good job. I learned recently from my colleague, Councillor Whitby, that actually, you know, in terms of, say, like schools that haven't become academies in Derby, then those that are left with the council, most of them have good and outstanding Ofsted ratings. So I know that's a very general point, but I think it's worth reiterating that the council really does do a very good job here. And I'm very dismayed that in this report, it's almost as if there's this idea that it was always whether to close Ashgate or Central. That was the choice. And somehow we must be grateful that Central isn't being closed. We need both of these nurseries. As you know, the whole idea of distance, we must remember that if you're somebody with small children and you're walking, as we want people to do, and as many of these parents will do, the distance from the place of education is a long way, because you won't just have one child, you may have several, etc. You may be also there going on to pick up from a primary school. I mean, I think in the week when the government has actually said that they're going to try to do more, maybe tomorrow, to help with childcare costs, to get more people back into work. The idea that we don't need to be encouraging people to use these nurseries more is just fallacious. And also, I don't have the numbers to hand, but I have looked at the numbers. I don't know, you will have them, Pauline. I know that Councillor Whip's got the numbers that are below the kind of the expected number. The numbers are not that low, and no real business would look at this and think, oh, you know, following COVID, we've got to close. Not when the difference between the desired numbers and the actual numbers are so low. So bear with me, but I do feel extremely strongly about nursery provision in Derby. And I do think, really genuinely, that this is the idea that we proceed to closure. The whole report assumes that there will be closure. It hasn't really listened to the will of the people in the consultation. I think that's the wrong step to make. Thank you.
Okay, Heidel.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really want to emphasise what both Councillor Whitby and Councillor Martin have said. Consultation, and this document is about consultation, is about listening and responding to the consultation. If you're asking for information before you make a decision, that's not consultation, that's something else. And that's the way I think this is being approached. We're listening to people, we're hearing their views, but as Councillor Martin just said, because the plan is that we need to close either one or the other of the nurseries, we will proceed ahead because we can ignore that bit because we've made the plan to actually balance the books. And early years provision, nursery provision is vital. We cannot reduce it. We need to maintain and increase it. So I really support the comments that Councillor Whitby and Martin are making about this decision and the ignoring of the consultation, the overwhelming consultation, as has been said, 91% objecting against closure. So I think we really need to pay attention to this. Otherwise, don't call it a consultation.
Thank you. Nicola.
Did you want to come back on any of that first, or is,
I am aware it's difficult because these are political decisions at the end of the day. Okay. Nicola.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I didn't want to, because I appreciate there's been a number of things fired, and I didn't know if there were any answers that were required to be given. I absolutely appreciate that there is a very strong call out from a number of parents and members of the public who are in this facility, and I understand that there has been a high number of consultees who are against this. What I would say, and my personal view is, you will always hear from negativity rather than positivity, and I do think that although the aspiration here isn't to stop supporting that area completely, my question is, this is within less than half a mile distance, is that correct? Yeah. In terms of the suggestions that this is purely down to send numbers and the impact financially, is that something that will be improved because of economies of scale and savings by having you know, one set of gas and electric, one set of management staff? Would that allow? I just think when we're looking at all the great points that have been made, genuine points that have been made, I think we have to take it into the bigger scale of things, that if they are combined into one nursery as opposed to two within half a mile distance of each other, there will be economies of scale in terms of savings. That will that make it a more viable solution going forward? And I think it's only fair for the officers to come in and give us that guidance, really. I appreciate what the comments that have been made, but I do think if there is no alternative being given at the moment, I can see why this is being proposed.
Pauline, did you want to come back on that one aspect?
Briefly, and obviously appreciating all the comments that have been made, but there weren't any specific questions, which is why I'm not responding, not because I'm not listening and taking what you say very, very seriously. And some of you have already been involved in sharing information and data over the last few months during the consultation period, particularly with John. But what I would say is this is a real huge dilemma that all very small organisations, particularly schools, face, and it is a matter of scale. And I think the point you've made is a good one. You know, tiny schools across Derbyshire as well, maintained schools, not just nursery schools, primary schools, face the same difficulties around economies of scale. It really is a dilemma, and it's a dilemma that's having to be faced right across county schools. Obviously, we have less of that as our schools tend to be bigger, but the nursery, the very small nurseries are the ones that really struggle. And, you know, I'm predicting this can just go one way with the increased costs, etc. Obviously, we are hoping and working with the schools and with the governing body to look at the sustainability of the new combined, if you like, combined school. We don't know what that will look like, but we'll do everything that we can to make sure that that provision remains in the area. Nobody wants this to be happening. Absolutely not. I didn't come into education to close schools. Absolutely, definitely not, and certainly not in the most deprived areas. But you know, we have to look at what are the models that have been proposed. What's the information in the consultation responses that gives us the confidence, that would give members the confidence that this school could become viable in the future and could be sustainable, and you know, and that's not what's coming through.
Thank you, Pauline. Just before I put my recommendation to committee, I do have to take issue, Nicola, about when you say in consultation exercises like this, you're going to hear negativity rather than positivity. If I was a parent living in Slat Lane, having to get my one or two children, one who maybe have special educational needs, down to Ashgate, and that nursery, which they've got used to, is going to be closed, and I'm going to have to then try and negotiate the very busy Ashbourne Road and then do another 10, 15 minutes walk. I don't think I'd regard that as negative. I'd regard that as being completely understandable. But I have got a recommendation to make.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back on that point if you're quoting my comments, please?
Yes, you can.
Thank you, Chair. No, I appreciate what you're saying. What I was trying to say was, for the 220 people that have responded who are directly impacted, there potentially is thousands of people across the city who haven't made comment because it doesn't directly impact them. But ultimately, the savings to this council would be a benefit for other services within the city. I just think you have to take it into that was my point that I've made. People will only comment on it if it's relevant to them and that point. And actually, on the bigger scale of things, savings is going to affect us all. Because it's Derby City.
Obviously, you could...
Chair, you can make political points all evening, or you can actually chair the meeting
I'll
and do
let you
what's
speak, but I didn't interrupt. Please don't interrupt me. I make the point that the people who are affected are going to be consulted, so you hear from them. You don't consult people who are not going to be affected. I mean, that would skirt completely. Alison, very quickly, I'm going to go to the recommendation.
Okay, I must respond. I feel compelled to respond. The Conservatives must stop just accusing us of making political points. It's just really cheap when children, you have accused the chair of making political points. It's very cheap when basically children's education at stake. And Pauline, the bigger picture in Derby is that we are in an abysmal state in education in this city. It's really bad. It needs to be said. It needs to be addressed. It is not good enough. We are failing our children broadly, and that's the bigger picture. And that's why, I don't know how big we expect nursery schools to be with 2- and 3-year-olds in them, but not that big, I would have thought. But just in response to Nicola's point, I mean, have we had any people marching on the council house, jumping up and down, signing petitions, demanding that Ashgate Nursery be closed? No, we haven't. And of course we haven't, because most people know and believe that nursery education and children's education is very important And therefore, if they haven't responded, it's not because they feel positive about the nursery closing. It's because, as Councillor Repton has said, that they do actually, they're not so affected. But still, there's been a very big response to this consultation. Thank you.
Very quickly, Nicola, you wanted to come back?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to come back on that point, threefold really. In terms of political conversations, there's been a massive campaign run by the Labour opposition in terms of promising that they would not close this, etc. So yes, I would accuse you of making political point scoring out of it during this particular time period. Number two is everybody is affected by budgets, the impact of this council, and you can't say that they're not. Every resident in this city is, and there are hundreds of thousands of residents, thousands of residents in this city, so they are. And thirdly, in terms of my opinions are valid and my opinions are my own, and I shouldn't be criticised by the chair for having them.
You're certainly entitled to your opinions, Nicola, and that's right and proper. I understand that, and the public will then judge. But certainly in terms of John and his fellow councillors, all they're doing, and I don't think we can criticise them from, are representing
Sorry, Chair, I didn't
the
ask you a direct question. I just made a point in response
Nicola,
to my
please,
question.
please.
I wish you would chair the meeting as opposed to making
I wish you wouldn't interrupt
points.
when I'm speaking. I haven't interrupted you. No one interrupts, but you do regularly, Nicola. Please refrain from it. John was representing the views of his constituents. I'm now going to put this recommendation to the committee. You can speak after that. I'm going to put it forward. In light of the overwhelming opposition to this controversial proposal and the evidence contained in the report, any closure plan simply cannot be justified. This executive committee therefore recommends that Cabinet immediately removes the threat of closure of this much-loved nursery and ends the worry and concern that many families and children are currently experiencing. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Okay. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. I think that's carried.
It's 5 in favour, 3 against, Chair.
Can I make a amendment to that proposal?
No, it's just been passed.
Sorry, I wouldn't give... No, Chair, you didn't give an opportunity for people to comment. You continue to chair this as the public will see you for what you are, Councillor Repton.
I said we'll go to the... I put it forward as a seconder, so we'll go to that. Nobody objected to that stage. We then voted on it. And then after the vote's been taken, you want an amendment. That's constitutionally... That is constitutionally
Chair,
incorrect. I'm sorry. We're moving on.
We should be able to financially sustainability with that proposal, right. Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I want to come back... I want to come back to the discussion we had about the number of SEND young children who are in this setting, and I don't know what the statistics are. We haven't been provided with the statistics, but there is reference in the comments to children who have been rejected from other settings and who are finding a place here. And it seems to be, and there's reference, and I think this must be an issue because there's reference to the Early Years Inclusion Fund as part of the response back to those comments. Now, it may be that every nursery setting, private or public setting, is fully aware of the Early Years Inclusion Fund. It may be that it didn't exist 30 years ago when I had a small child who would have benefited from that. But there may be some settings who aren't aware of it because they haven't regularly had children who needed extra support. And when they're presented with a child who needs extra support, they can't cope and they are virtually telling the parents to take this child away, and the parents are feeling that their child is not welcome, and as a result of this they are finding a setting which does understand and engage with such young children. So I've got a recommendation which I hope picks up on that point, because I absolutely believe that at that age every young person should be able to be included in their local setting.
So what's your recommendation?
So my recommendation is to ask...
Does it relate to this consultation about Ascot Nursery closure?
Yes, because the report talks about the importance of SEND.
Okay,
and
let's hear your recommendation.
As have the number of comments here.
Let's hear your recommendation, and if anybody wants any amendments, can you please shout up before we take the vote on it? Thank you.
To ask Cabinet...
It's always helpful before rather than 5 minutes afterwards. Thank you.
To ask Cabinet to ensure that there is good recognition of the Early Years Inclusion Fund by all early years providers in Derby, to help ensure young children with emerging SEND are able to remain in a stable learning setting.
I think that is passed.
4 in favour, yep. None against, Chair.
Are you okay for the word?
It is me again, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this is a more positive report, looking to build additional capacity in our SEND stock, building on phase 1, when we looked at creating further places which we've created at Ivy House and Kingsmead Special Schools in phase 1. And the purpose of this report is to seek the agreement of Cabinet to progress with phase 2, which is namely the remodelling and expansion of the primary pupil referral unit. This is one of the proposals based on the consultation which closed in 2022, for which we received 223 responses. So we are looking to, knowing our children and knowing the increased needs of young people, the proposals in this report are a continuation to continue to develop social, emotional, mental health strategy and provision in the city. And as we know, that is increasing and has been increasing, particularly post-pandemic. And we have received the feasibility studies to be able to develop those provisions. So the expansion and remodelling of Newton's Walk former primary PRU will allow Kingsmead School to provide specialist support for learners with social, emotional and mental health needs through a more varied provision and curriculum offer. And it's really important that the environment, the new environment, supports that enhanced curriculum offer so that it's something new and different. And this includes special school placements, full-time shared placements with a mainstream school so that we have students who are still on roll at their mainstream school but have the additional support through the special school placement, particularly hospital medical placements, alternative provision and personalised programme packages and provision for permanently excluded pupils, most of whom have social, emotional, mental health needs, if not some aspects of special needs. So it's forecast that phase 2 will ensure that additional provision is available within the city starting from April 2024 and that we'll be building towards that. So building 25 additional places from April 2024, increasing the overall commission number and moving on to Kingsmead Special Schools alternative provision will allow schools to purchase of up to 20 personalised packages as part of the graduated response offer, which is the pre-EHCP provision, which is quite often not really invested in, and that's part of the national picture. The national review of SEND is strongly encouraging strengthening the graduated response offer. So we're recommending those approving the refurbishment and extension of former Newton's Walk PRU, noting that the delivery phase 2 will be assessed through the gateway process before adding into the capital programme, to delegate authority to the Director of Legal Procurement Democratic Services following consultation with the Strategic Director of People Services to enter into all necessary grant agreements and ancillary documentation to deliver phase 2, and to approve the amendment of the capital programme for the schemes outlined in Appendix 1 and any necessary contingencies within the approved SEND capital subject to the programme management processes. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Pauline. Just a question from me. Newton's Walk, I'm just trying to scan through. I was looking for the additional numbers at Newton's Walk. Do you have those to hand at all that are being proposed potentially?
Yeah, so looking at the 25 additional places from April 2024,
And I think we're talking about the additional places for the Kingsmead Special School. At Newton's Walk, we're talking about adapting the provision so that the curriculum is more suitable.
But you're not necessarily talking about increasing numbers?
No.
Okay.
It's actually because we know are no longer excluding, thankfully, permanently excluding primary age pupils or in such low numbers that actually we can actually modify this provision to help us to be able to meet needs sooner rather than later. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that clarification. John.
Thanks, Joe. Just really quickly, going back to the 2 nights of budget debate that we had, I think it's obvious that the whole council agrees that we need more local specialist provision in Derby. So, yeah, we fully support this. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Nicola.
Just to welcome this report, I think as a personal level, I've had to make that decision myself between a school that supports my children's mental and development versus their educational profile. And I think that's been a challenge for us as a city for a few years. There's been some fantastic work at St Martin's, point of interest or public interest or whatever the word is. But I do think that I do think it's important this dual point of being able to go into mainstream classes and get that education that's required to help raise the attainment of our SEND pupils will be a real fundamental game changer for the city, because we do, it isn't, obviously it's classified as a disability, but it really is a different ability, and it's just focusing the minds of how we get those children with those different abilities to be able to get to the education that they deserve. And I think it is really welcome, this report. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no more comments on that, we'll move on to, thank you, Pauline, on to item 14, which is compliance and, with contract and financial procedure rules. Alison, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So there's 3 items in this month's report. The first one is in relation to a capital scheme at Pear Tree Infant School and Walbrook Nursery School, where the school have been successful in being awarded some additional funding from the DFE's school rebuilding programme. So the scheme is subject to a further consultation process, but is estimation of £590,000 worth of capital funding, subject to the detailed design planning and procurement. It's recommended to approve delegated authority to the Strategic Director of People Services to sign a third-party contribution letter to the DFE in respect of the proposed capital works. And just to note that the school are actually funding those costs from their, the additional costs from their school balances. The second item on the report is in relation to the Household Support Fund. So many of you will be aware that the Household Support Fund we've had 3 waves of that funding. And in February of this year, the DWP announced that there would be another household support fund which will run for 12 months from the 1st of April to the 31st of March. So that's for a 12-month period, unlike the previous announcements that have been running for 6 months at a time. The award to the City Council is £4.449 million, which is exactly twice the amount of the six monthly allocations that were previously been awarded. So in essence, it's the same value as previous allocations. And the household support funds to support those in most need with food, energy and water bills, and they may be used to provide supplementary advice services, including debt and benefit advice, which is very much welcomed by the City Council. The proposals for this scheme is very much based on the same principles as the previous scheme, and that is in essence allocating food vouchers to all schools in Derby on the numbers of pupils eligible for housing benefit and related free school meals over holiday time. So that's cost of a circa 2.78 million. We'll also establish another fund, circa £1 million, towards help towards the cost of living, and that will be based on an application basis as per the previous schemes, and will rely on referrals from our partner agencies into that. The new aspect of this fund is that we will be using some of the grant to develop a community-led approach to supporting residents with the cost of living and exploring ways to provide debt and benefit advice. So the recommendation in the report is to accept the award of the 4.449 million and to delegate authority of the final details of the scheme to the Strategic Director of People Services and the relevant Cabinet member. And the final aspect on this report is in relation to the Brown Land Release Fund. And the Council's a member of the OP, which is the Office of Government Property. And in the spending review in 2021, a Brownfield Land Release Fund was established of £180 million, and there's a current round has £60 million to allocate, and all our applications must be submitted to the OPE by 31st of March 2023. Just to note that this fund is a housing-led fund, and that's the key criteria for the fund. And as detailed in the report, that the works funded by the land must be released for housing by the 31st of March 2027. So it's recommended in the report to delegate authority to the Strategic Director of Communities and Place to submit the final details of the bids for submission. It's also important to note, though, that if any of the bids are successful, a full report will come back to Cabinet, which will seek approval to accept the funding and will secure the relevant capital and revenue budgets, because it is probably a requirement that there will be some match funding. So just to make it be absolutely clear that that further report will come back in due course if we are successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Are there any comments at all? Alison, Lucy and Hardiel.
Thank you. The first, for the Household Support Fund, I'm just wondering, over 12 months, I would expect the demand, particularly for heating costs and things, to be much higher in the second half of that period. So I just wanted to know what considerations are being given to the spend profile in the way that's going to be managed, and rather than, you know, we've got the money, let's spend it. In terms of the number of school days, that's obviously known ahead of time, but the demand, depending on the coldness or otherwise of the winter, may be a bit uncertain. Do you want to take all 3 points together? The second one is also about the household fund, and it's how we're going to manage support for families where the children are not in school. You talked about the allocation of vouchers according to the number of children in school. So if children are not in school, how is that going to be covered? And the third point is regarding the brownfield land release. That's slightly on an aside. It sounds like Drury Lane car park might be an area that's a bit of brown land that we might be able to add to this and get some money for. But I don't know whether there's a process being considered to ensure that ward councillors know if land in their area is being considered for this, or will they only hear about it when it gets to Cabinet?
Thank you, Lucy. Alison?
So in terms of the profile for the Household Support Fund, the proposals are that we'll run it on a 2 6-month block, so we can do that reconciliation between the profiling of the spend between the 2 6 months, recognising exactly what Councillor Kerr has said around the winter pressures over the winter. So we will run it over 2 half-yearly periods, so we can take check around the profile of that spend. So we have considered that. In terms of families not in school, believe this has probably cropped up before. It's families are awarded the free school meal entitlement. It's a means tested one based on the particular circumstances of that time. That award is only made once, so that assessment is only done at the once. So I would imagine if the children aren't in school for whatever reason, that eligibility is not moved away at that point. But the assessment has got to be made. In terms of the Brownfield Land Release Fund, it might be opportunist that I've got a colleague behind me who's very, very close to that to be able to comment on how that's worked with particular councillors. But just to say on the Drury Lane car park, that definitely is an area that has been recognised as an opportunity to be able to bid in for that particular area. But I'll hand over to my colleague on the other areas.
Thank you, Chair. I think we haven't notified ward councillors in relation to the Brownfield grant because that is very much work that we're doing now and it is only just now being finalised, but we could certainly do that, Chair. What I can say, it is our practice for every housing development site that we take forward to talk to ward members. So each group of ward members will be aware of the housing development scheme being proposed for their area, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Alison, you mentioned that the Household Sport Fund is cash. It's the same as last year. So, what is what with inflation and everything? What's going to be the reduction, real terms reduction in terms of what's available to make for families and children?
We are working through the details of the scheme, but you're right in so much that it is cash flat, and we will only be able to offer probably what we've offered last year in terms of the allocations. We won't be able to put inflationary increases on those awards, and what we also need to understand, particularly as the last household support fund is just closing, as we've just got into March, and we need to understand the potential demand across the city, because that could have changed as we've gone through winter and the cost of living crisis. But the award is the same, and it's a finite pot, and that's all we have to allocate.
Can I just clarify? Have you worked out what it would be, or is that something that's not?
No, I haven't got that, but we will absolutely share those details once we've worked through. We're working on the principles. They're about the same as last year. They're the sort of benchmark that we're working to.
Chair, it'd be helpful if, when you have worked them out, to let us know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, welcome money from the government, but totally agree, is it enough in terms of inflationary costs and things, particularly around those people that have tried to manage during this winter period. And, personally, I've had a number of residents who are getting themselves into significant debt, which I welcome the push for debt management, etc., because I think that is going to be something that we see a lot of. People have sort of been managing, but not very well, and we are going to have significant debt implications as a city going forward. But in terms of the allocations historically, there's always been a set amount that people can apply for, and there was a limited number of applications available, if you like. Have they always been fully taken up, and is there any left over that, and will that pot be considered as, is it within our gift to up those amounts, but to alter the parameters of need?
Alison?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have the statistics, but that's the bit that we're working through at the moment. So in terms of the referral element of it, we did have that all has been used up. We did close the scheme around about, I think, 10 days, 2 weeks ago, because it didn't quite run up to the end of March. So that had all been used up a couple of weeks before the end of the financial year. The bit where we do have a reconciliation issue and an opportunity is around the uptake of the vouchers for the school meals. They're not all uptaken by 100%. We do obviously work with the schools really closely to make sure that those vouchers are used and are cashed. But where that doesn't happen, the council does get that money back, and we reallocate that within the next scheme, so we do not lose any money in relation to those uncashed vouchers. They all come back into the system.
Thank you, Alison.
Sorry, thanks, Chair. So would that do we have the flexibility then? I appreciate why there are some people that are automatically gifted these if they've been free school meals and their circumstances have changed and they choose not to claim it. Absolutely understand that. But is there an opportunity for that fund then to become available as part of the supporting grants for debt, fuel, gas, electric? Do we have that flexibility to move it from preschool meals into this?
Absolutely, we do have that flexibility. There's criteria within the fund as to what we should support, but there's no values around what we would expect to fund in that area. So absolutely do have that flexibility. Thank
you very much. If there's no more questions on that, we'll move on to item 15 is exclusion of the press and public. This is that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. The press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following item on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraphs 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Are members okay with that? Okay. Right. Stephen can close the